nutrition, lifestyle, and PED education. This is the Elite Strength Podcast with Aaron Scarfy.
Welcome back, guys and girls, to another episode of the Elite Strength Podcast, episode number 17, I think now. So bringing on Mr. Chris Black. How are you, sir?
Very well, sir. Thank you very much for having me on.
Most welcome. It's been 17 episodes overdue. So
yes, we've been trying to organize this for a while, but schedule clashing. Not that I don't see you most days.
I was going to say we basically train together every other day.
Schedule clashing, bro. Schedule clashing.
Yeah, we should just... And so not like we're going to skip training to do a podcast. So that'd be silly.
Live podcast together.
True. We'll just do it naked. Fuck it. Send it. Anyway, man, tell the people about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what you do.
All right. So this is always a tough question to answer because I have to roll, 15 years of life into basically a small little snippet or a summary. So
people aren't that interested in you, bro. Come on.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I try to keep it as brief as possible, So basically, I am a contest prep coach, physique coach at Strength Lab, a training facility here in Hawthorne, Melbourne. I also have a bachelor's degree in sport and exercise science, and also one in business as well, which is less of importance to, I suppose, what I do, today. I also, too, a classic physique competitor. So I will be competing in season A coming into this next new year. So at FitFest, so that's the kind of end goal for us there. That pretty much covers the small snippet summary of kind of who I am, what I do, and I suppose I do it because I love it.
Yep, totally fair, man. So a bit about your competing history. Competed and trained from a very young age, I believe.
Yeah. So, I mean, back when I originally started training in the gym when I was probably, I want to say about 15. I wouldn't say it was anything serious. It was just more so, I suppose, based around, trying to get a little bit stronger for football and cricket and, various other sports that I kind of played while I was young. So pretty much started training, fell in love with it quite quickly. And then obviously the local gym owner, who at the time was like an IFBB, or in the past had been an IFBB Mr. New South Wales. So he was quite a high level bodybuilder. He approached me and he's just like, "Oh, you got a bit of physique on you. You should think about competing." So when I heard that, I was like, "Oh man, that's weird." I started looking it up and I was like, "There's men on stage in like trunks and sparkly trunks. And they've got tan and it just looks like a weird thing for people to do. I don't ever want to do that." And then the more you kind of get into it, the more it becomes the norm. And then it's kind of just gives you something to continue to kind of, progress at, over life. So yeah, that's basically, where I'm at with the competing, where I started in terms of competing. And then I did my first show, I believe it was 2013. I was about 17 years old. Mm-hmm. That was, at the time that was an untested show, which I didn't really know there was a difference. In that first show, I come third. It was a good, that prep I did was probably about 6 weeks. And I went from I was about 100 kilos and I dieted down to about 75. So no contest prep that I've ever done past that was harder than that. I lost about 25 kilos in 6-8 weeks. And as you can imagine, I wasn't looking fantastic. I look back at the photos now and I'm like, you know what, for what I actually had, I was doing like 2 hours of cardio a day. I was on like probably less, maybe 1,000 calories a day, if that. The only carbohydrates I had were basically a little bit of oats, like pre-workout. That was it. The rest of it was just tuna and broccoli, or fish and broccoli, and just the typical bro body
rice cake.
Yeah, right. That was pretty much all before the MyFitnessPal or MyFitnessPal, all before flexible dieting was even a thing, and this was before any of the forums and stuff like that too. So it makes me sound old. I am still relatively young, so I'm only 26 now. But because I started this when I was so young, I'm still obviously quite young now. After that prep, I kind of just did a little bit of research on my own. I went and did a lot of research through 3DMJ at the time, who were kind of like really pioneering the approach of like flexible dieting, longer contest preps. So basically from there, I just watched Eric Helms, anything that Eric Helms would put out, Alberto Nunez, The Godfather, anything those guys would put out, I would just soak it up like a sponge. So, and then I was like, you know what, I actually think I can probably do this better. So for that next prep, I actually coached myself. So I dieted for around about 30 weeks. And I ended up winning the at the time was INBA, now ICN. So I ended up winning the INBA Tropics teenage, and also actually won the junior division as well when I was about 18 or 19 years old. So that was a pretty good achievement for me there. And then pretty much after that, I went back to focus on my studies. And then pretty much I've just been like prepping friends and stuff in between there. The first real prep I did was with one of my best friends as I prepped him for a couple of the same shows. So he also then the following year in 2015, it's weird because I kind of went the opposite way. My first client was a contest prep client. Rather than, a lot of people would start the opposite way around where they would, coach Gen Pop and slowly get into the transformation and then get into bodybuilding, that sort of thing.
Earn your way type thing.
Yeah, right. And to be fair, Az was a genetic freak. So, and he still is. So I didn't obviously need to do too much, but I kind of just put him through a similar approach, longer prep. We obviously focused on maintaining strength, obviously focused on, a slow progression of dieting. Back in those days, HIIT was the in thing. So I had him obviously doing HIIT back then as well. And he obviously ended up winning the A&B teenage division. And then also won the INBA, same title that I had won the year prior. So that was kind of that. And then I finished uni, moved down to Melbourne. And then, I've been down here. That's where I met you. And I've just been over at Strength Lab kind of ever since, continuing to obviously go with the contest prep stuff. I put quite a few other clients on stage between now and then. And I've obviously started working more so heavily now in the education area, which is where I'm going to be progressing to kind of in the future. And obviously higher level hypertrophy and contest prep guys. Yeah.
And I guess how's the approach now changed from no carbs and having tuna and broccoli every meal to, being able to flexibly diet now and understanding the difference?
Oh man, honestly, it was probably one of the biggest game changers. But at the same time, like there's a certain level of resilience that gets built from having to go through something like that approach that I feel like everyone should go through to a certain degree. And to be fair, some people probably still need to go through that kind of restriction, but maybe not the whole thing, maybe just towards the back end when food starts to get, quite low. But, I suppose just the revelation of even still, I feel like flexible dieting is a bit of a loop. You kind of start with like, oh, I could eat this ice cream and I can eat that and I can eat that. And you end up kind of pushing it maybe a little bit too far. I know I certainly did when I first started using flexible dieting. There was no adhere to your minimum fruit and vegetable intake. Don't worry really too that much about fiber. It's just all about, if it fits your macros. And you realize you come full circle. And now I would say I'm probably, if people would look at my diet now as compared to then, they would be like, oh man, this guy's so broke. He eats the same thing every single day. And honestly, it's like you end up just coming full circle. So it's like, you can do it, but you just don't,
Yeah. Well, it's almost like you start to see food as more of a fuel source than anything now. You don't really have that emotional attachment to food, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So talking about your prepping, so I know you've had a couple of preps and didn't go overly well because of COVID. Walk us through that and, basically what the plan is going into season A next year.
Yeah, man. So the first show that me and Dean tried to do was, I believe it was 2 years ago, and it was season B. We had started dieting and we'd obviously, set our sights on really, kind of focusing on, I believe it was under 90s at that time. And obviously too, because it'd been so long, I was probably not in the best shape when I first started working with Dean, just because I'd just moved down here. I'd literally just finished uni. I wasn't training too much. And I really wasn't settled with life that much. But we really once I, was over at Strength Lab, I was able to kind of really knuckle back down again and get back into it. And then obviously COVID ruined that first prep. I actually had a really, really good off season. This is also in between, lockdowns and all this sort of stuff as well. So that was always a bit of an annoying part to kind of go through. But then the next prep, I got in. It's kind of been good because every single time I've gone back into this, I've actually, come out better on the opposite side. So
last you're going in with a better physique, right? You're going to each off season or off each break in a better condition.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then that last prep we ended, I believe, about 10 weeks ago. Obviously with season B getting cancelled again due to COVID. So basically, Dean's just like, oh, what do you want to do? Do you want to, put off competing for a little while, or do you want to just continue to kind of roll into season A? So basically we're just like, okay, we'll continue to roll into season A. But we can use this little 8-week block that we've got to really, I suppose, rebound quite well. I don't really love the term rebound, but there's certain situations where it is possible. And in this situation, with where we were at, it was certainly possible. And we obviously, used that really, really well. So I've actually started prep for season A now as of yesterday. So that gives us around about 20-ish weeks from the Vic qualifiers, and also to around about 23-ish weeks to FitFest, which is the end goal for us. In that time, obviously, we've dieted down a few more times, and, my physique definitely is probably more better suited to classic. Yep. It's just like, I kind of look more of like a bodybuilder when I'm in the off season, but then once I start to diet down, I have quite a small waist and my lines start to really come through. So this time round, we'll be strictly focusing on classic, which, for my height, I still have quite a bit of room to grow into the weight cap. I believe, up for my height, I'm around about 179.5. So puts me smack bang in the middle of class C, which will give me up to about 93 kilos. I suppose we estimate at the moment, fully inside out peeled, we're probably looking at around about 87, 88. But we will see. We'll kind of see, because every prep's kind of a little bit different, and, still with its own unique challenges. So with food at the moment, we haven't started super aggressively. We just pulled about 1,000 calories out. Protein still moderately high. I believe macros are around about 260 protein, 400 carb, and 60 fat. Weight training, still continuing obviously with a 5-day-a-week split, as obviously we, train together now as well, which has been really good. I've actually really enjoying training with a partner. It's been a long time. The longest time I've just continued to train on my own, and I didn't honestly really enjoy training with people, but I think when you are picking a training partner, it's important that you guys both gel well and you both understand each other well, which obviously, we've known each other for a long time. So it's been easy.
Yeah, man, that's a pretty good breakdown. I guess my question to you would be, and I guess to those potentially prepping over the Christmas period, every coach is a little bit different. And I imagine every coach is probably going to be doing the same thing regardless, and probably using the Christmas period as a diet break of some sorts, or a potential refeed and that sort of thing. For yourself, do you know what your plan is around Christmas, or is it still a bit too early out? And I guess, how would you approach it being a prep coach?
Yeah, so I can discuss this in two ways. I'll discuss this as me as the athlete and me as the coach.
Yeah, go on.
So me as the athlete, when I begin a contest prep phase, I typically come at it from the perspective of, I don't like to leave any stone unturned. So for me, I like Dean said at the beginning of prep, what do you, if we could probably diet break over Christmas, I don't know how important that period is to you. For me, I'll be that guy that'll rock up to the family events with a Tupperware container. Like, I really don't care. Like when I'm starting a prep and I'm, pushing towards a goal, like honestly, it was psychologically, it would do me more harm than good to be like, I'm going to have this meal off plan when I can easily just, take my cream of rice or something with me to the event and have a Coke Zero or Pepsi Max. So even over that period, like I will not break my diet. I will just continue to stay on. There's flexibility there. Like if I want to fit something in, I probably can. In saying that, I probably won't, just because it's not really in my personality type to do so. And like I said, it would do me more harm than good. The second answer to me as the coach is, if I feel like an athlete needs that over the Christmas period to ensure that they can actually get to the stage, then we will come up with a plan surrounding that, whether that is, maybe banking some calories up over the week in order to get, I suppose, just lower the amount of calories that they consume on that day, then fair enough. Or, however they want to kind of approach it, we can come up with a strategy surrounding that will still, continue on their goal. I suppose it also depends on where are they at within that contest prep phase themselves. So are they someone that's ahead? Are they behind? Are they smack bang, where they need to be? Because honestly, if someone's behind, I'm going to tell them straight up, like, this is probably not a good idea. Like, you're already behind. We need to, keep the pace with our rate of loss that we're looking to see each week. Otherwise, we're simply not going to get to the stage in time, and you're not going to get the result you want. And honestly too, man, like a lot of you'll find it. I've worked with quite a lot of people now, and a lot of the top tier kind of athletes, they honestly won't even ask you about it. They just assume that they will just continue on as they normally would, So, but again, obviously some of the beginner competitors like don't really have a concept of, because again, you have a lot of family around you, and they're like, oh, it's just one drink, it's just one meal, don't worry about it, it's one day. But in the scheme of things, like that one day can actually mess people up quite a lot, because that one day can turn into 2, can turn into 3. And before they know it, they're in this cycle where they're just continuously trying to play catch up. So I think, yeah, obviously the coaching answer for me there is, we'll devise a strategy individualized to the client. Me as an athlete, I will just continue to diet through, I don't care at all. It doesn't really worry. I enjoy all the foods that I eat anyway. So I'll just control that portion size and just have a meal there with me. And a lot of my family now, I suppose for me, it's easy because they understand what this is about, what I'm trying to do. So they really don't even question it anymore.
Yep, that's fair. And I guess, would you probably as a coach be pushing clients, I guess, to try and get ahead to account for that? So, maybe either start the dieting process maybe a couple of weeks earlier, or be even a bit more aggressive on the front end.
Yeah, man, definitely. So whether it's season A or season B is irrelevant at this point. I always start people earlier than what they think they need. Probably even more so coming into the Christmas New Year period, because it can just be a little bit of a lag period there. So I will always start aggressively kind of out of the gate. Obviously depends on how much weight the client has to lose to obviously get in shape, and whether they need maybe like a pre-prep phase prior to a prep, which some people do need. But for the most part, like a lot of my guys and girls are in a position where they actually don't really need to worry about it that much, because I've already got them ahead by that point. That by that point, it's probably at that 12-week out mark where 10 to 12 weeks out, I'm probably looking to give them a diet break anyway. So whether or not they're someone psychologically that can take that, then I will give it to them. And again, it depends on the division as well. Like if it's a bikini competitor and they're probably going to be a little bit softer, whether it's ICN versus IFBB, whatever. ICN's more of a softer look. IFBB is like still quite, peeled regardless of whatever division it is. But all my guys and girls, I aim to have ahead of the game, and I always prep with probably 4 weeks extra than what I think they may need. That's a good rule of thumb for me.
Yeah. So going from like a traditional 16-ish week prep, I guess, to a 20 or even 24-week prep to account for any potential issues that are going to come up, and being able to give a bit more diet breaks and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I also like having the extra time up my sleeve too as well, because one, it helps those diet breaks and, additional refeeds not only help manage fatigue when it comes to obviously maintaining training performance and then maintaining tissue, but they also really provide a good opportunity for me as a coach to see how they respond to whatever carbohydrate intake that I'm putting them on. And I can start to use that data to then, translate across to building their peak week. Because honestly, if you get to the end of a contest prep and you haven't given them any refeeds, because from a physiological perspective, they may not actually need a refeed. Some people, say for example, one of my clients, Jess, at the moment, she does better not having refeeds, just because obviously, with that influx of carbohydrate, you experience a bit of an increase in ghrelin, and it really does drive appetite. At least in the short term, even though, realistically, it's not going to do too much to hormones like leptin and stuff like that. We know it's not really going to do too much, but psychologically, like managing your weekly calorie intake in terms of like carb cycling, that sort of thing, definitely, at least anecdotally, seems to have an impact, particularly towards the back end. So I may start with more of like a front linear kind of regression with calories, or just reducing them down. And then towards the back end is where I really start to play with things like refeeds, multiple high days and stuff like that. So I can kind of assess their tolerance to carbohydrate and build their peak week.
Yeah. And I guess another thing is it also accounts for stress, right?
Yeah.
It helps with sort of sleep regulation a little bit. It also helps with that mental stress of having to deal with dieting down.
Oh, no doubt. Like, honestly, man, having refeeds in as well, not just anecdotally, but from what I've seen with working with a lot of different people is, even if it's like, I suppose one day probably doesn't do too much, but like if you have back-to-back high days, maybe a floating high day in the middle of the week, and you've set your carb cycle up like that typically works really well towards the back end. But if it's just one day, it's usually not enough, because they usually start to feel pretty shit still anyway. But at least if it's back-to-back, they can kind of like, it's just 5 low days then, and then I get a high day. It's just 5 low days, then I get a high day. So it's like you get that buy-in while you're trying to push them to a new level of conditioning. Whereas sometimes, like if you were just to continue with flat calories the entire time, their performance will go to shit. They'll start losing muscle. Their sleep and stress, just increase, and sleep goes down, stress goes up a shit ton, drive that cortisol response. And honestly, sometimes you can see that sticking point on the scale. A lot of the time as well is when it's not uncommon for me to give someone a back-to-back refeed, or even a refeed or a diet break, and their weight drops. It's just a way of managing stress. Once they drop off that water weight from the cortisol, you typically see or actualize the losses that you've been working towards over the last few weeks. Whereas if you would just keep going,
Yeah.
the weight will come down eventually, but it just isn't as clear a picture. You kind of get this whoosh effect almost.
Yeah, and the physique doesn't actually represent what's actually going on, right?
Right. It looks fatigued, dieted.
Yeah, like you look tired and it's just the muscles don't pop, nothing's happening, you're just flat as shit.
Yeah. Or in the gym, so you get a pump and it's just like, there's just nothing going on.
So I guess what's the plan for yourself moving into season A next year? So you're looking to do classic, coming in at 87, 88. What's a typical, I guess, diet, or I guess this far out, being 20 weeks out, what's your diet look like? So you sort of spoke about your macros, but from a food standpoint, like what's it actually entail? Like what is it that you like to eat, even though it's sort of the same thing every day?
Yeah, sure, man. So for me, like at the moment, I try and keep it as similar as possible to what I had already been eating in terms of like food selection. One thing I will do, like just when I'm setting up a new diet for myself, just to ensure that, you know, I'm not deficient in any, I suppose, micronutrients and stuff like that as well. I will actually punch a day of eating into like an app called Chronometer. So basically that's just an app, kind of like MyFitnessPal, and it will basically give me, I mean, it does have a verified database, so I can punch in an entire day of eating and it'll just give me the micronutrient breakdown for all of my food selections, just to make sure that I'm not deficient in anything. So in terms of like what I'm actually going with at the moment, I typically do eat probably around about 300 to 500 grams of fruit total per day. I can get into the specifics of those if you like. Probably about 400 to 500 grams of non-starch vegetables. So I really do.
Yeah. When you say non-starch, just for the listeners, I guess, what sort of veggies are we looking at?
Yeah, so I typically try and get something from each of the different kind of families. So, you know, I'll go for an onion, I'll go for mushroom, capsicum, tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, carrot. That pretty much, you know, covers it. And I'll kind of just, you know, cycle those vegetables around, just based on kind of my preference, because obviously sometimes you run out of vegetables, so you've got to learn to substitute for other things. Given that, you know, the average in terms of like weight of vegetables is pretty similar in that it's roughly about 4 carb per 100 grams. So regardless of what the vegetable is, it's always going to be roughly similar to that. Although in prep, to be fair, like I am that guy that will put that tiny little bit of like, you know, even if there's like 75 grams of onion and I've got 70 put into MyFitnessPal, I'll chop that off and put that in the fridge. My girlfriend hates it. But she's in prep now as well. So she's kind of doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. So she's understanding a little bit more.
Yeah. So I actually suppose in the way that I kind of set up my nutrition as well, I obviously gave you the macros there before, but for breakfast for me, I obviously fast for 3 hours in the morning. And then I will continue to, the first meal of the day will be my pre-workout meal, which will be a cream of rice. In that I will have, you know, generally about 100-ish grams of cream of rice, about 50 grams of whey. I'll obviously have a massive serving of fruit as well. So apple and blueberries, peanut butter, and also have dark chocolate in there as well. Dark chocolate is something that I do consume every day just because of the high polyphenol count, in terms of another mechanism of lowering oxidative stress. The second meal I will go for will be post-workout, which will be like about 500 grams of Chobani Greek yogurt with some cereal and some strawberries. I will have another meal later on in the afternoon, which is just chicken and some vegetables again, cucumber and tomato. Then the next meal will just be a lean beef, vegetables again, and potato. And then my final meal of the day will typically be cream of rice, again, just without the dark chocolate. I may substitute out a couple of meals and bring in some maybe egg whites, some toast and some vegetables as well. But I typically rotate around through the same, you know, food sources kind of day in, day out. So like all of those food selections that I just kind of listed off there, that's basically what I was eating in the off season. I basically just reduced the portion sizes to fit my macronutrient intake for the day. I suppose the only real thing that changes from day to day is like, you know, if I have let's just say I have like an apple and I don't want to put it back in the fridge, I may have like 130 versus 120 grams, and I'll just kind of offset the number of carbs or whatever it is from something else.
Yeah, right. And I guess with that, looking at the diet, I guess probably a lot of people, maybe it's just me, but things like potatoes and stuff like that, not really into it, or?
Yeah, I love white potato. I really do. So white potato, sweet potato doesn't really agree with me. Any of the orange type of, you know, vegetables don't seem to digest well for me, and they typically tend to clog me up a little bit. So I will go with, white potato, you know, white rice, pineapple, all those other things as well. So when I do look to make an adjustment or when Dean looks to make an adjustment, I should say, to my food, often he's happy for me to obviously track my macros for most of the prep. And then whenever I feel like I want a meal plan or whatever, which I will, probably this time around, we may wait until like 12 weeks out or so.
Yeah.
That's when I'll look to just stick to the meal plan. Because I feel like towards that back end of a contest prep, I really feel there is merit to just having a meal plan that you just stick to religiously and you don't have to waste energy thinking about. Because anyone that's been like very, very lean or contest shredded knows how annoying it can be when you get to the end of the day. And although you're flexible dieting, you've got like 20 protein, 2 fat and 10 carb. And you're like, oh, fuck, what am I going to eat? And I just couldn't be bothered, So I'd rather just have a list of foods that I just pin off through the day and I can just tick that box off and move on to the next thing I need to do.
Yeah. So we're really trying to kill decision fatigue effectively as the actual fatigue of training and dieting accumulates, right?
Yeah. The decision fatigue is the killer. Like, honestly, it would annoy me more than anything having to actually pick different foods at that point of a contest prep, when in reality, like there's no running from hunger. You're going to be hungry. You're going to feel like shit. And if you're not, you're likely not in shape. So it's just the fact of the matter is there's nothing you can really do to outrun. You just need to make peace with the hunger and just eat your meals for what's on your meal plan and not try and, I think that's a big mistake that people make in their contest preps are they will, as their calories get reduced, they will try and go higher and higher and higher in terms of their volume. And before they know it, they're eating like 2 kilos of veg, all these blueberries and raspberries, and they end up just messing up their own digestion. And if anything, the body weight on the scale is just not really trending in the direction they want because they've just increased the food volume to try and fill a short-term need of this hunger that isn't going to be satiated from the food that they're eating anyway. They're so far away from where their body likes to sit in terms of like homeostatic function that the body is going to try and consistently get back to that. So regardless, like they're not going to feel good from whatever they eat. It doesn't matter how much volume they jam in.
Yeah, right. I guess from a food standpoint, have you done anything on prep or made any sort of weird decisions or, when it comes to food selection, have you gone so far down and just have like a funny food story where you've just gone, oh, fuck it, I'm just going to eat that?
I'm just trying to think.
I know this. It's funny because I know some people that have some like really weird reactions when they start dieting down. Like they start like sleep eating and shit like that.
I've never sleep eaten. I've heard stories of people. For me, no. Like I do dream about food. So I will go through times where maybe I'm dreaming about a donut or dreaming about something, and I'll wake up and I'll be like, "Oh fuck, did I actually eat that or no?" Because it kind of feels real, and you're like, "Oh shit." And then you wake up and you realize that was just a dream. So for me, no, like I've definitely been that guy probably in, my last contest prep that I did ages ago. I probably was that guy where I was trying to over volumize, egg whites, all the vegetables, all the fruit. And it didn't lessen the result, at all really. It was just, it does definitely increase his food focus, which, is something that you don't really want to be driving up. It is going to be impossible to avoid towards the back end, but you don't want to be purposely driving it up. And the more, I suppose, decision fatigue that comes with that, like you said, it's the more you're kind of going to put yourself in a position where, you're going to be just feeling like shit because you're constantly making decisions about food selection. So aside from like those weird, I'm trying to think if I had any like random cravings that I tried to put in, but I actually really like hot sauce when I start dieting. I think that's kind of just a little hack for me is that, if I put enough sriracha on something, I kind of, my mouth starts burning and I don't have the same want to eat the food just because it doesn't taste as good. So I suppose, if you look at like the hedonic staircase of dieting, which I think RP kind of popularized, I typically do adhere to making my foods more and more bland as I do go down into that dietary phase, because then I become more satiated with it. So by the end of it, honestly, it's like salt on just a normal baked potato just tastes incredible. Like Dean sent me a few things and he's like, oh, you should do this. And he's like glazing his potatoes with this weird fucking garnish and stuff. And I'm like, I'll give it a crack, but probably not.
No, exactly. It's not something that's going to be sustainable. I just like to put my potatoes in the oven and I'm done.
I don't even have the want or the need to literally sit there and do that to make it taste that much better, because anything just tastes amazing at that point.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. I was going to say, do you have any like client stories of something like that happening, or troubleshooting clients, I guess, as a coach? when clients get to that back end and they start to really struggle and have that decision fatigue, and even some other forms of, stress popping up from purely dieting down and training, and they sort of, in social situations or even situations they just put themselves in where, they think, oh, a donut's not going to hurt, a lolly's not going to hurt, a can of normal Coke versus Coke Zero is not going to hurt. I guess, how would you tackle that as a coach?
Yeah, so I think a big part of what I do is I give people long time frames before I actually think they're ready to prep. Now, the reason I do that is because I put so much work into habit formation surrounding the contest prep process before I actually put them into it. So I actually don't really, to my knowledge, have any clients that have really gone that far off the plan. I mean, obviously, I definitely like having an open door policy in that, like, if they do mess up, they need to tell me straight away so we can try and mitigate whatever it is they've done or whatever it is that they've eaten. But to my knowledge, for the most part, I definitely try and, in my tracking each week in terms of variables and biofeedback, I definitely will pay close attention to things like their appetite, their sleep, their fatigue, how much training volume they've accumulated throughout this past like 3 to 5 weeks of their training mesocycle. And then obviously too, at what point is kind of their breaking point, like how far can I push them and dig them before they need to have a little bit of a refeed and kind of top things back up again. So honestly, man, to my knowledge, like, it doesn't happen that often. Like, there may be the rare client, but kind of people know their expectations, or know my expectations from working with me from the get-go, that like, I definitely don't, really take any shit when it comes to that. For me, like, I definitely think there's like different coaches for different types of personalities. And for me, it's like, I coach much the same way that I, am as an athlete. And it's, if you're wanting to do this, you're wanting to do well. I've never really understood, for me, like, it doesn't just mesh with my personality, is like the thought of, I'm just going to do this for fun. I still think, even if you feel like you may not win, like, you should be putting yourself in a position and with a mindset that you're coming to win. Like, you don't want to be coming into a show thinking, oh, I'm coming in to take second or third. Like, that should not be the mindset. It should be like, I'm coming in to win this show regardless. And I'm just going to put those actions in place. And more often than not, like, if you put enough of those appropriate actions in place early on, before they even begin a contest prep, they understand what the expectation is when they begin. So it's not that far of a change for them to actually then go ahead and like really adjust things too much. Like, it's not like they were completely off diet and then day one we started a contest prep and they're really struggling because they hadn't had any of the appropriate habits in place. They weren't hitting their macros consistently within a certain range. They weren't smashing their activity targets. They were getting their training sessions in. They were filling out their check-in data like to the T.
Yep.
I definitely have more of an in-depth approach with my competitors when it comes to, their feedback that they give me each week and stuff as well. So I have a very high level of expectation for the people that I work with. And I definitely do hold them to that. So, but again, you're going to have the odd person that's going to be like, I ate a donut. Like, what should I do? What should I do? And in those instances, like, it's kind of hard because it depends on how far along they are in the process. If they're behind, which to be honest, not a lot of my guys usually are, but if they are behind for whatever reason, and they're like, oh, I ate a donut, what am I going to do? Well, then you have to have that tough conversation with them. Are you going to push the show back? Are you able to, put them in a position where you're going to, reduce their calories over the next week or so to continue to dig? Because the last thing you want to do is, if they're on that borderline of like, I suppose, binging or whatever it is, the last thing you want to do is push them past into that point, even further, because that's when they can run into some real poor issues coming out of that contest prep. And, I typically do try and screen for that as much as possible with, potential eating disorders coming out of prep.
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes it's just impossible to know because some people can be so focused on getting the actual goal and the result, which, it is a good thing in a way, but at the same time, like, for some people, it can be a super, super negative thing. And that obviously when they don't win, it puts them into a spiral and, they start binging for like 8 to 10 weeks and there's no controlling what they're going to be doing post show. Even, me, myself, like, there's been times where, I, especially in that first prep, where I dieted really, really aggressively. And this is why I think it's so important to have built-in periods where you're trying to actively mitigate fatigue. Because, when fatigue is really high is when you're going to be most susceptible to all the cravings. It's when your body's like in I suppose, more of a threat type of response. And you're going to want to, drive those, I suppose, reward pathways via food. So that's where it's super important to manage fatigue, because I feel like if you manage fatigue well, they shouldn't ever be digging that long that they actually need to break diet too much, provided you put in the adequate effort prior to build those habits, before they go into a contest prep.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fairly good rundown of how it looks. And I guess a question off the back of that would be, I guess when it comes to the whole binge eating type scenario and eating disorders, obviously as coaches, we can't, coach people that have that. And, we screen for that as best as possible. But as we know, when we do diet down quite a bit to, body fat levels where we're not meant to be, we do have this, hormonal repercussion with leptin and ghrelin, obviously deciding to sort of stuff our stomachs around and our appetites around. What is it that you put in place post-show to sort of mitigate the want to binge?
Yeah. So look, this is always a tough one, and it's definitely going to be individualized to the client. But for the most part, I definitely do have a framework that I do adhere to. The first thing that I initially do post-show is, go and enjoy a meal with your friends. I typically do like I hate the notion of cheat meals, but I am a big fan of like free meals. So free meals with certain constraints surrounding them. So I'll say, go out and have a meal or 2 or 3 or whatever with your family and friends for the first couple of days post-show. Take some time to really let everything soak in. And then I'll immediately bump calories back up to maintenance, or whatever their calculated maintenance is from that position where they ended the contest prep. Because, if they've lost 10 to 15 kilos, their maintenance is going to be extremely down-regulated. Their metabolic function is going to be a lot lower. So I will immediately put them back up to their new calculated maintenance, and I will see how well they can adhere to those numbers, post-show. And then we will slowly start to escalate food from that point and begin, I suppose, a reverse per se from there. But I'm definitely trying to put on some weight straight away to try and get them, hormonally back to a normalized position. Because there's going to be, 2 to 4 weeks probably of like a no man's land period where, I suppose the emotion is really low after, them finishing the show, because they've built up this massive goal and then they do it. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, what now? There's this big letdown period post-show where it's kind of like a post-show blues. So they kind of use food as a means of driving that same pathway that the show kind of did. So, although, most of the time it's never going to be perfect. So everyone wants to have this, nice little framework of like, I'm going to put them back to maintenance and it's going to be fantastic. Often you need to coach the individual as, they're kind of dealing with their issues. So making sure that you are paying extra close attention to the feedback that they're giving you, that you are having a really detailed check-in process to ensure, does this person actually need more food? Like what can I actually do to kind of mitigate this point? Because I also feel like the more seasoned a competitor is, the shorter that lag period is. Yeah. I definitely know that, I've seen that a lot of the times from like first time competitors to second time to third time. That it definitely gets easier for them, and that lag time to get back to normal actually is a lot shorter. Whether or not that just comes from having dealt with the process before, it's kind of like the same thing with like dieting. It's like, does it actually get easier, or do you just get better at handling that process? Yeah. I think it definitely is the latter, and that you just get better at handling that process. So, but honestly, my main focus is getting them back to a normalized homeostatic function without getting too fat. And then we have a really, really good springboard to then move into a gaining phase from there. Once we've completed that post-show recovery period, probably lags for somewhere in the ballpark about 6 to 10 weeks. And then by about that 10-week mark, then we're actually, if provided they're lean enough, we're in a good spot to then actually start actively increasing calories and really starting to, specialize in terms of body parts. So another thing that I'll immediately do post-training as well is drop their volume down to more of a maintenance-ish type of volume. So I'll bring them somewhere in the ballpark of probably 3 to 6 working sets per week. And I'll try and get them to keep a ton of reps in reserve. So really not going over maybe like a 3 out of 3 reps in reserve. Not even training anywhere near close to failure, just to really let that fatigue dissipate as quickly as possible. So basically, lower the training stimulus, because they've been absolutely fucked for ages. Lower the training stimulus, lower the cardio, start to actively bring steps down as well. So that's something I'll immediately do post-show as well, is bring steps down to more of a manageable level. So let's just say that they finish on 12 to 15,000, depending on whether they're doing cardio or not. Yep. Immediately cardio will go and steps will be the next thing I'll bring down with a food increase. So that whole period there should take probably about 6 to 10 weeks for them to start feeling somewhat normal again.
Yeah. So, we're pretty much trying to mitigate the amount of stress that's been accumulated, right? I guess thoughts on people trying to rebound post-show when it comes to gaining muscle?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, right? Like anyone that has been in proper condition knows you are not even anywhere close to being in a position to rebound from post-show. The only thing that you are sensitive to is lipogenesis. That's literally it. Like you're in a position where you've been dieting down to really, really low levels of body fat, like almost dangerously low levels of body fat. And then you were not even close to being in a position to store anything except for fat. So, lipogenesis is the only thing you're really sensitive for during that phase. So like, I don't think that the rebound typically, exists from that point. Obviously in my instance where it was kind of a little bit different, I ended prep way earlier than when we actually were planned to. I wasn't even anywhere close to being stage lean yet. I probably still had about, 3 to 5 kilos left to lose. So I was in a position where I was still feeling pretty good. So the notion that you can kind of rebound from like a post-show period as well, like there's only a couple of ways you can do that. If you're an enhanced competitor and you're driving PEDs really, really high, that's the only thing that you can really do. And that's what they typically do, is to get the super compensation of glycogen. They're holding a higher peak androgen load, and then they start to fill out and they're like, oh, I've gained 10 kilos of muscle. But in reality, you're still not in a position to do that. There's only, like I said, very, very few instances where that's actually possible. And if you're a natural competitor, it is never possible. There is no possible way that that's ever happening.
Yeah, you're going to run yourself into the ground with some health risks if you attempt to do that, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And then also too, like going from a position where you've just lost like, 15 kilos to get on stage. And then you are putting on a ton of that, water weight again, like that stress that's going to go through your organs, your liver, your heart, your kidneys, from going from like, let's just say you'd lost 10 kilos and you put 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 kilos back on in a week or two. That's so dangerous to do. Like that massive fluid fluctuation to determine like your electrolyte balance, the stress on your kidneys, your heart, your, even your brain. Like if you've ever had like a binge post show and what happens once you increase a bunch of sodium and stuff back in, everything just swells up and you just feel like a big bloated whale. Like it's not good and it's very, very dangerous.
No, that's fair. And I guess you sort of mentioned a little bit about enhancement stuff. So is it the same approach post show with your enhanced athletes as well as your natural athletes?
Yeah, so look, this is an interesting one, but it definitely is the exact same in that I suppose the principles remain the same in that regardless, it's still going through, a bit of a cleanup period. So, dropping back to maybe more of a HRT type of dose, TRT dose, or even like sports TRT. So maybe even a little bit of a higher, depending on how much muscle mass the individual is carrying. And then basically you're just looking to hold that for a good little period while you're, because again, these hormones that you're introducing synthetically to your body are driving up sympathetic stress, and likely you've just come off a period where anabolics are at their absolute peak. So for you, like going into the only thing you can really do there is bring them down to really drop off that sympathetic stress and drop down that sympathetic tone, as well as increasing food, lowering output. And then obviously to, keeping that level really, really low for a good period of time. So again, it's the exact same kind of approach. It's just an extra variable that you've thrown into the mix there.
Yeah, cool. So there's no real change in terms of the approach or the principles behind post-show recovery when it comes to enhanced and natural athletes. It's just the whole goal is to remove stress effectively.
Yeah. Literally cool. Just removing stress. That's it.
Cool. I guess, are there any situations where post-show you'd encourage the super compensation idea for enhanced athletes, obviously not for naturals?
I suppose if an individual's gotten extremely lean, and I'm talking like really, really lean, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we try to peak and you were a little bit flat still, and I kind of wanted to push things and maybe add in some additional things. Then maybe it's more so for my curiosity more than anything, just to kind of see how you respond. Could you have handled more carbohydrate, and how would you have looked with that? So that's really the only position where I would really look to drive that super compensatory effect in obviously enhanced population groups. And that's pretty much it really. Like it's just more so me gathering future data for, future preps, or maybe we have another show in weeks time where, we didn't really nail this peak. Because again, if you are working with someone for the first time and it's the first time you've ever put them through like a peak, even if you gather all the information in the world, like you're still got to play with stress and stuff on the day that, you know, may change and alter the look. You know, I've seen cortisol towards the back end of a show, like just destroy some really good physiques. They've gone from looking really, really peeled like a week or two out to looking 6 weeks out, you know? So managing stress towards the back end and peeling back that as much as possible is the end, always the end goal. But again, like if we can do things better and I'm like, oh, okay, you're still really flat, we can really look to, you know, push some extra carbs in, then I'm literally just going to be doing that to use that for future reference for the next time that we run a prep.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I think that's it from me in terms of questions, man. It was just pretty cool to work out, I guess, your approach to prep, because I know that every coach has their own sort of change and, you know, ideas and their own methodologies behind prepping clients. And it's cool to see someone's up and coming, you know, probably a bit quiet on the socials there, but very, very experienced coach, even for a young age. Before we do let you go, as always, we do have one question. 3 Instagram accounts that you follow that better your daily life, whether they're funny, whether they're educational, whether they're whatever it is. And no, you can't look at your phone now.
Oh, shit. Okay. Just trying to think. Who do I follow that is good? Well, first and foremost, Strength Lab.
Yep.
Strength Lab. Number 2, Dean McKillop.
Yep.
Number 3. So you give me 3. I could probably give you 5.
3 is all we need, bro.
And I also really like Joe Jeffrey.
Yep. Cool. And for those listening, man, where can they find you?
Yep. So my Instagram handle is chrisblack_coach on Instagram. You can obviously just flick me through a message on there. If you do wish to apply for coaching, I am currently full at the moment. And my waiting list is still quite lengthy, but in saying that, like I always try and take on more people, but at the moment I am kind of capping my numbers with where I'm at just because I am prepping into season A. And I have some competitors that are competing. So I do like to give my athletes and my clients, you know, 100% of my time, which again is why I'm not massively active on the social, is because I am generally working with a lot of people. So it's kind of like, it's weird because it's like, you see those coaches where it's like, they'll put up like, oh, look how many clients I have, this and that. And it's like, bro, I can tell you, if you had a lot of clients, you're not posting all the time.
Yeah,
you know, you do not
working,
have the time, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. And obviously too, if you want to drop through any sort of inquiry or questions, you know, I'm always happy to answer any questions that anyone has free of charge. Just send me a message on Instagram. So yeah, that pretty much the best way to contact me.
Easy done. Good, sir. Thank you as always for jumping on and having a chat. And I'm sure we will have you back on soon for another chat about some random stuff.
My pleasure.
And as always, thanks to the listeners for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.